Hey, it's Jody. We are hurtling, I tell you, towards a new year. And I don't know if you are this way, but I tend to take this time of year to take stock a bit, think about how the past year went, try to lock in some good memories, and also reconnect with the things that matter to me going into a new year. It's not so much a resolution, but kind of a recalibration. And I know for me, that often means remembering my values, the work that I love, the people who make the stuff, whether it's music or art or books or audio, the stuff that helps me make sense of myself and the world. I know that's all very high-minded, but if that's not what this time of year is for, then I don't know what it is. Which all brings me to a gentle reminder, dear listener, that the end of the year also means we are nearing the end of the Radiotopia Fall fundraiser. It has been such a joy to make this day over this past year, and as you know, we have such big plans for next year as we head towards our America 250 series, and truly, we cannot do it without listeners like you taking the step from listener to becoming a Radiotopia member. When you support Radiotopia, you are literally helping us make this show by providing stable funding that we can use to pay for equipment, to pay our researcher, to work with Radiotopia to market the show and grow our audience and do fun collaborations. Support from people like you is the Jenga piece that keeps this whole thing from crashing down. And remember earlier when I mentioned checking in with your values? Well, to me, independent, ambitious media, a collective of the best audio makers in the world, gosh, that feels right in line with the kinds of values I want to express, and I suspect you do too, going into a new year. So, I know you're watching the calendar, but there is still time. You can do it right now. Cast a vote for this show and all of Radiotopia. Go to thisdaypod.com to support us right now. thisdaypod.com to make your tax-deductible contribution. Happy New Year, and thank you. Well, folks, we are reaching the end of the year, which means that if you are anything like me, you might be letting the spending go a little bit. Between holiday shopping and travel and parties and end-of-year donations, it can be easy to lose track of how much you're spending, what you're spending it on, and the overall state of your financial picture. Well, if you want to keep your finances under control this holiday season, you need to be using Monarch. Rated Wall Street Journal's best budgeting app of 2025, Monarch is the all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean interface on your laptop or your phone. I've been using Monarch for a few months now, and for the first time in maybe ever, I feel like I have a real sense of how the money in my life is flowing, which, as I head into a new year, is going to really help me make some smart choices. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code THISDAY at monarch.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code THISDAY.
I'm Jeffrey Rosen, President and CEO of the National Constitution Center. A few years ago, learning about the forgotten meaning of the pursuit of happiness changed my life. When the founders wrote that famous phrase in the Declaration of Independence, they meant an ongoing commitment to self-improvement and lifelong learning. This discovery inspired me to write a book, and in my new podcast, I explore the founders' lives with the historians who know them best. Plus, filmmaker Ken Burns shares his daily practice of self-reflection. Join me for Pursuit, the Founder's Guide to Happiness.
Hey everyone, over the next couple weeks we're bringing you some of our favorite episodes from 2025. This is in part because we're giving ourselves a holiday break, and in large part because we are hard at work at our big year-long series for next year, 50 Weeks That Shaped America. I'm very excited about this series. We've already recorded a bunch of episodes. I think it's the best stuff we've ever done. But anyway, for now, listen to one of our 2025 favorites. Don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter, and we will see you on Tuesday, January 6th, with week 1 of 50 Weeks That Shaped America. Thanks for being with us in 2025, and Happy New Year. Hello, and welcome to This Day, a history podcast from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, March 24th, 1982, a church in Tucson, Arizona, declared itself a public sanctuary, in particular to immigrants from Central America. This was the idea of the minister, John Fife, who got the support of his congregation, and soon there were banners hung that read in Spanish and in English, "This is a sanctuary for the oppressed of Central America, and immigration. Do not profane the sanctuary of God." Over the next few years, the idea of church sanctuaries, often in defiance of immigration enforcement, would grow and spread, with synagogues and churches and other groups around the country adopting the movement. Shout out to listener Ruth, who suggested that we do this. It is a super fascinating and truly moving piece of very relevant recent history. And look, I want to shout out the Quakers, my people. They play a big part in this as well. So I'm eager to do it. But here, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
More than just oats.
More than just oats and righteous justice. That's what we do.
That's right.
So let me lay a little bit of the background, the kind of geopolitical background for this, and then we'll talk about this church in Tucson and, of course, this larger idea of churches as immigration sanctuaries. But, I think there's kind of two things going on in the early 80s that are worth pointing out. One of them are sort of things happening in Central America, and one is then the reaction to that, the political and legal reaction to that in this country. So obviously, during the 80s, we have lots of civil wars and dictatorships, many of them supported by the United States, happening in countries like El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala. I think listeners might know that my family lived in Central America in the 80s. My parents were covering many of these conflicts. So this is all close to home, literally, for me. But we have that, and no surprise, leads to a lot of people leaving those countries, seeking refuge in the United States. And in the United States, you have this ongoing question, which is still a question today. What is the legal language and what is the legal landscape around people coming to this country and claiming asylum? And so, largely speaking, there's the idea of people coming here as quote-unquote economic migrants fleeing poverty, not necessarily fleeing repression or fearing for their lives. And then there's always legislation that then regulates how much you can and what defines political asylum for other reasons. And there is a new law in the early 80s that broadens the scope by which people could claim to be seeking asylum in the United States. But no surprise, that more expansive definition comes into conflict with what's happening during the Reagan era, which is they are in support of a lot of these regimes that people are escaping. So, you look at some of the numbers, we don't have to go too deep, but you look at some of the numbers of people who are granted asylum from Central America versus, East Asia or other parts of the world, and it is much, much, much lower. So it creates this pressure of people who are coming here, sometimes because of actions the U.S. has helped support in their home country, and then a new administration, which is, to put it mildly, not welcoming to these kinds of immigrants. So that leads then to pressures often in local communities, often communities in the South and the Southwest, to say, gosh, what do we do with these people who are coming here and seeking refuge? So that brings us to our church.
Yeah. And it's a combination of both the proximity to the border where people are crossing and coming into the United States, but also this rich tradition of liberation theology in Central America that has created religious ties between communities in the United States and communities in Central America. And religious leaders who are not constrained by U.S. foreign policy. They see the U.S.'s role in the civil wars in places like El Salvador and Guatemala as something that the U.S. creates an obligation from the church and from the United States, whereas the U.S. government is like, well, we can't say that they're being persecuted because it's our backed governments who are doing the persecuting.
That's such an important point to highlight, that so many of the sort of progressive ties between the United States and Central America did run through religious channels. Progressive churches in Central America, progressive churches in the United States.
And that's so contrary to the story we tell about religion in the 1980s, which is all about the moral majority and right-wing evangelicals. And here you have the sanctuary movement emerging in these churches. And the big impetus for this movement, 13 Salvadorian asylum seekers die in July of 1980 in Arizona's Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. And in response to that, this Reverend John Fife, who is the minister of Tucson's Southside Presbyterian Church, moves into action. He says, well, we've got to find a way to provide legal aid for refugees so these asylum seekers can be here lawfully and that they're not put in these dangerous and precarious situations because of immigration enforcement. And he really wants to work within the rules of asylum seeking, right? He's like, it's very clear that these are people who are running from political persecution. Their lives would be in danger if they move back to their home countries. This fits the new law that was just passed redefining asylum seeking. So all we have to do is connect them with lawyers and it's going to be fine. And he does that for 2 years, and 0 of the people who he helps support get asylum.
Yeah. And that, I think, that demoralizing aspect of it, of feeling like, okay, the government actually wants to do nothing to help these people. So then what is my moral obligation as a minister of the faith to sort of step up? Do I keep trying to feed them into this pipeline that I know is a dead end? Or do I say, well, if you're going to do nothing, then what should the church do? And the church steps up in a major way.
Yeah, when you realize the law isn't your ally, you find other ways of doing the work.
Can I ask the two of you a larger question? Maybe you know this, but I feel like I'm like a lapsed Quaker, which is like the hardest thing in the world to be because it's the religion that requires the least of you. So I don't really know I don't really know the like religious landscape, to be perfectly honest.
Both NIki and I grew up in the church.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm asking you, like,
Catholic church and the Baptist church.
What is your sense of the Presbyterian Church's sort of role? Does it have a sort of progressive streak? I mean, I know it's probably more progressive than evangelicals and so forth.
Presbyterians are known sort of as being like highly educated, like they deeply value intellectual pursuit. And so you will see that a lot of Presbyterian ministers, have advanced degrees and they, study the Bible, both the Hebrew and the Greek, like they're deeply invested in thinking about things. And so sometimes that makes them a little bit more progressive because they are thinking about and studying things like liberation theology. And they're thinking about like how these things apply in our everyday lives. And so at least that's always sort of the shtick that I've been.
But you're not surprised that this comes from a Presbyterian church?
I'm not surprised. I think maybe other denominations, sure. but not so much from Presbyterians, no.
And of course, in the United States, it really depends on region and history because there are so many fissures in all of the different denominations. But I'm not surprised to hear that a Presbyterian church would be more progressive. This is also a period of kind of interfaith alliances. And it is interesting that when John Fife goes into action, he chooses the anniversary of the assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero, right? Not one of his Confederates within his denomination, but somebody who represented liberation in El Salvador. And he chooses that anniversary to announce that his congregation was going to be acting in open defiance of Immigration and Naturalization Services, which is the precursor to ICE, and provide their churches as a sanctuary for Central Americans. And what was interesting about it was they had kind of already been doing this sanctuary work, but they decided that at that moment it was necessary to be very clear about the sanctuary movement because it would call attention to the injustices of the law and the way that the law was not being fairly applied. And so you get a sanctuary
movement. And that's
movement.
the moment we're marking today. Yeah.
We're supposed to learn from our own mistakes, but other people's errors can be instructive too. From efforts to control the weather that went disastrously awry to the untimely death of the Segway boss, history is a treasure trove of mishaps and meltdowns that can teach us all. I'm Tim Harford, host of Cautionary Tales, the podcast that mines the greatest fiascos of the past for their most valuable lessons. Listen to Cautionary Tales wherever you get your podcasts.
This day is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Listen, going online without ExpressVPN is like driving a car without a seatbelt. Even if you are the best driver in the world, do you really trust your life to all the other erratic, maniacal drivers on the road? Look, I'm pretty savvy. When I go online, I try and protect my information. I'm careful about what sites I visit, but I often have this lingering feeling in the back of my head that just one mistake will send my information down this whole rabbit hole where it'll get traded and exploited, and you never know where it will end up. ExpressVPN stops hackers from stealing your data by creating a secure, encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet. When I turn on ExpressVPN, which, by the way, works on phones, laptops, tablets, and more, I know that I am staying secure. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/thisday. That's expressvpn.com/thisday to find out how you can get up to 4 extra months. expressvpn.com/thisday. So we are starting to get into the thick of the holiday season, and while I love the holidays, I also know that it's a really tricky time to try and eat healthy. The sweets, the baked goods, the holiday parties, the family dinners. I have a theory that the window for bad eating actually goes from like Halloween through to the Super Bowl or maybe even Valentine's Day. It can just be a really tough stretch. Which is why, when I have a chance to actually cook at home for myself and my family, I really want something healthy, seasonal, full of vegetables and great flavors. And HelloFresh does the trick. They are the #1 meal kit in America, making home cooking easier with chef-crafted recipes and fresh ingredients delivered straight to your door. And they've recently taken things to the next level, doubling their menu, packing it with healthy, high-protein recipes from all over the globe. If you cook at home with HelloFresh, you just might forget that you ate all that junk at those last 5 holiday parties. The best way to cook just got better. Go to HelloFresh.com/thisday10FM now to get 10 free meals and a free item for life, 1 per box with active subscription, free meals applied as discount on the first box, new subscribers only, varies by plan. Once again, that's HelloFresh.com/thisday10FM to get 10 free meals and a free item for life. So before we get to the fallout from this, I mean, to paint the landscape even more, I mean, obviously this idea of churches as sanctuary for the persecuted goes back to, the actual teachings in the scriptures, but also back to the Underground Railroad through the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, it is a deep, deep lineage, right?
Yeah. I mean, the church has always been a hub, a stopping point on the Underground Railroad. If you're thinking about 100 years earlier, this is where a lot of people went to get safety, to get protection. I think about it even in like South African apartheid, like black churches were seen as safe spaces. Until this day, I think people still have those ideas of like, if there's a place that I can go, it's like the church or maybe the fire station. You know what I mean?
Or
like
school.
These ideas. Or a school. Yeah, for sure.
And the idea that it would be unlawful and immoral for the government to breach the boundaries of a church in order to engage in a violent enforcement action. And so that idea of sanctuary is that there actually is, in some ways, a wall between church and state, and it is the church door. Yeah. And in some, in some imaginations, the schoolhouse door, although that's it's more fraught place.
Totally. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how this idea spreads first and then some of the pushback to it. But it seems pretty quick that, Fife takes this stand and other people pick up the call.
Oh, yeah. I mean, at first, you've got about over 150 congregations, but from there it spreads to about over 1,000 Christian and Jewish churches and temples that are like, we want in this sanctuary movement, we want to house, because the numbers of people, they keep coming, and it gets really difficult to house as many people as you would like to when you're limited on space. And so more faith leaders come to the table and say, hey, how can we help? And it takes on such sort of like wildfire that the government takes notice. I think the government was kind of like, okay, we got a few rogue churches, like not a big deal. Now we've got over 1,000 of these religious institutions. This is going to be a problem. And so they pull a card out of their playbook that I was like, wow, they do this all the time. Like, they send in an informant, a man by the name of Jesus Cruz, who pretends to be a sanctuary supporter, and he goes to these meetings in Tucson and he records the meetings, and he is, like talking to people and getting all of this intel, and he gets enough information to give it to the federal government, basically turns it over and turns them in. And, right after that, John Fife and a lot of his fellow leaders are arrested and indicted.
Yeah. We should give a shout out to this guy, Jim Corbett, who was a Quaker leader and one of the kind of founders of this idea and ended up doing a ton of activism. My parents knew him a little bit, but did a ton of activism in the U.S. and in Latin America, smuggling people, resisting immigration law enforcement, but real kind of remarkable character, and I think hero in the sort of progressive Quaker community, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You can see a real effort as this trial gets underway, because the DOJ indicts these 16 people and they're putting them on trial. But the judge says you can't talk about context. You can't talk about foreign policy. You can't talk about conditions in Central America. You can't talk about your religion. The only thing you can testify to was, did you contravene U.S. immigration law?
Right.
Which yes, no answers. Yeah. We don't want any context.
Right. Which obviously not asking, sort of restricting context is problematic on its own face. But to point out, U.S. immigration law makes that kind of value judgment and makes these decisions within context, right? So the law itself is looking at what are the reasons that you come to this country? What is the context by which you arrived here? So then for that to be restricted from the conversation about the legality or illegality of harboring these people, there you go.
Feels a little disingenuous.
Oh, yeah.
Feels a little unfair. I mean, and how are you supposed to sort of like state your case when you can't actually state your case?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this becomes in some ways like a political circus. I mean, the media picks this up, and right after court, people are out on the steps and sort of giving the context that people need to hear and telling them, yes, we did do this, and let me tell you why, and let me give you these conditions, and let me state for you like why this matters. And so that becomes a major public, turning point in terms of support and sympathy.
There's a new banner outside the church now that also reads, "The truth will set you free." That was up there throughout the trial, and then the conviction of 8 of the members of the movement.
When they added, eventually.
Yeah.
The truth will eventually set you free.
Exactly. But none of them were sentenced to jail time. And then, like we see with a lot of civil disobedience, yes, there were convictions, but the movement had just grown past a tipping point, I think, at this point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's something so remarkable about that, right? Especially when we think about the government's efforts to suppress justice movements. That's what's happening here, right? They're trying to silence these people, and they silence them in the courtroom in a way. But as Kellie was just saying, they take their case to the public. And the thing is, it doesn't really seem like the public supports the government here. It's almost like they've kind of lost at least the public battle. And that matters. Like, the sanctuary movement persists throughout the 1980s, even though the Reagan administration is strongly against it. The Bush administration is not supportive of it. But by the time you get somebody like Bill Clinton into office, once you start to get new peace accords in Central America and a lessening of the repression in these countries, then the U.S. government no longer has to back these violent regimes and oppressive regimes. And that opens the door for changes to this policy so that the people who were seeking sanctuary and given sanctuary over the course of more than a decade are finally set on a path to get asylum status and eventually a path to citizenship.
Yeah, legal status. I mean, if you think about this is such a success story. When you think about the fact that you fast forward 10 years and you have over 500,000 Central Americans winning legal status. I mean, I don't know. I'm hard to pressed to think of another example in which the church sort of like holds its ground and does this work, and it leads to successful outcomes.
Other than kind of every other civil rights progress in this country, right? But no, I mean, it's like, it's a reminder that like not that long ago, one generation ago, there was that. And I think that's the, obviously the parallels to now. And, I'm very curious and heartened by the resurgence of a sort of religious progressivism in this country. I've started going back to Quaker meeting a little bit. Like a lot of young people are showing up. I think the war in Gaza activated a lot of people around that, and the second Trump administration. And so I think we're seeing that. John Fife is still around. He's 85 years old. Jim Corbett passed away, but not that long ago we saw, kind of churches be at the forefront of this movement. And it's very different from the kind of political and social movements we tend to think of as being religiously driven these days. So,
it also invites us to think about law and its legitimacy, which is the thing that I have been sort of grinding on in my brain for quite some time now. There have been so many appeals to the importance of institutions and the importance of law, and those things are true. And yet there's a big fat asterisk at the end, which is when those institutions and laws are unjust. There is a long, long tradition stretching back to before the revolution that says, let your conscience be your guide. And if you're willing to take the punishment and make it into a moral cause, then you should do that. And I think we're invited to think about those things a little more deeply at the moment.
Sure. All right. Well, we will leave it there. So relevant, and obviously a lot of other little rabbit holes we could go down. But we want to thank our listener Ruth for suggesting this, and also I think it's been a while since we've had one that jumped out as a candidate for this should be a movie or a miniseries, but this is definitely put that on the list.
I'd watch that. Yeah. Who's playing Reverend Fife?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good one. But anyway, Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
This Day is a proud member of Radiotopia, a network of independent, artist-produced podcasts. Don't forget to sign up for our America 250 Watch newsletter. Every Thursday, members get exclusive access to analysis and information about the upcoming semi-quincentennial, commentary from our team, and a list of fascinating things that happened that week throughout history. Join in, find out lots more at thisdaypod.com. You can also follow This Day Pod on Instagram, Blue Sky, and YouTube. Jacob Feldman is our researcher. Brittany Brown is our editor. My name is Jody Abergan. See you soon.